Welcome to Season 3 of Maintaining Mental Fitness, a free webinar series to support mental fitness for organizations and individuals in an endemic world. A big thank you to our sponsors, the Continuing Care Safety Association and Biz Safety Software.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Maintaining Mental Fitness wrap session, I guess we could call it. So happy to see people joining us today and excited for our conversation. So today's session, what we're going to do is just spend some time looking at what we covered, kind of why we covered the things we did, and ultimately what can you do going forward. As we move through some of the conversation, Daena and I will kind of ask a few questions back and forth to one another, but we'll also ensure that we create some space at the very end for questions from the audience, even feedback, things you like, things you'd like to see differently, as we look to do this hopefully again in next season with season 4. So in terms of revisiting why or kind of where we are as a society right now within the workplace, it's become very evident that there's a lot of evolution that is happening. And in particular, we found in the last few years, it's been happening at a really rapid pace. And when looking at this evolution, something that we've been thinking a lot about is how to categorize it or how to examine it so that we can hopefully find ways to support the different elements inside of organizations, inside of ourselves. And the first bucket that we've really noticed some evolution is within that workplace experience, where the ways in which we work are changing and evolving and are continuing to grow. We're seeing the frequency of change, both in how we work in relation to the tools we're using, as well as the intensity. So there's been some big lifts we've been finding within, say, municipalities, as an example, some major technology infrastructure being done. And ultimately, this can create a lot of unsureness, a lot of demand on brain units to help navigate and move through that effectively. Layer that in with the how we work being more so the way that we're living the values. If you recall at the very beginning, we spoke a lot about that those values inside of organizations are really being redefined and re-examined. I know, say, again, in thinking about municipalities, the way that for some groups, say within operation, connection was created was with the trailer or the tailgate talks prior to going out. I know for myself, even I worked within the parks department for the city of Toronto in my undergrad. And that was a big part of the day, was like that gathering in the shop prior to leaving and getting a chance to connect with everyone, kind of chat about what's happened, the hockey game, the baseball game, whatever it was. And some of that has come back and some of it hasn't. And so it's often put pressure on side of organizations and teams to re-examine how are we going to create connection if that's what's important to us. As an additional element, so you have all this change, which we've talked about, requires brain units, it requires thought, it requires intention to move through, which ultimately impacts our capacity. And then we layer that on to the fact that as individuals, and not for everybody, but something we have been noticing is that there is this reduced capacity. There's increased stress, there's increased fatigue being experienced that might be driving some increased threat response within our brains, where we might be more irritable, more defensive, wanting to ensure ultimately that we're surviving and moving through all of the things that are going on around us. And this doesn't really have anything to do with how resilient we are. It's more to do with the stimulation that's coming at us and the possible threats that are going on, whether it's financial crisis coming out of COVID. I know now in Atlantic Canada, I'm not sure how it is across the nation right now. There's been a lot of conversation, and I can't remember the acronym now, but it's a respiratory illness with children as being like a big thing that's different than COVID, that has like a big impact on infants in particular. And so it's just creating all this extra pressure. I even was speaking with a doctor recently around viral contagion and flu season being a real uptick this year with both the volume as well as the intensity. partly being because we've been isolated for like 2 or 3 years, where our bodies haven't evolved at the same rate as the viruses have been evolving for influenza. And so now we're having to sort through that. And it ultimately, what I'm saying is there's a lot of stuff, and there's always something new that we're trying to navigate that might impact, our freedom or impact our abilities to function. And we have to process through that. And then finally, we're really seeing that individuals, with all of this going on around us, are really re-examining what it is that's important to me. What am I looking for? What boundaries do I want to set within the place that I work? Maybe I'm looking at not working till 10 p.m. every night. Maybe I'm looking at working and stopping at 5, or maybe I don't want to work in the morning. I want to work in the evening. Like, there's this whole thing that's going on around individuals trying to find ways to advocate, place boundaries, and move for something that's more authentic to themselves. All of this is really impacting that workplace experience. We spent a lot of the session or this year focusing it on leadership and how we show up as leaders. And there's some really big paradigms that are happening within that, where for the last 30 years, we've been really operating under this predominant theme of leadership being one of stability, resilience, control, having answers, solving problems, kind of this image of the leader that fixes it all and is going to save the day. And something that we're noticing is that it's becoming impossible for leaders to maintain that pace, let alone have the answers to all the problems that might not even have answers in the first place. I know when working with leadership teams, we often say, well, what's the 5-step plan for equity, diversity, and inclusion? There isn't one, because it's going to be dependent on individual bias, experiences, privileges, capacities. All of these factors are going to come into how we navigate through. And so that's going to require a totally different mindset, as opposed to giving answers and giving solutions to problems, and more about asking questions and seeking differing perspectives, which then is going to, kind of influence our abilities as leaders to maybe leverage, when it's hard, control and fear to get what you want to happen. That boundary is really being pushed on as like, yeah, you're probably, as we spoke about, not really going to have control. We got to focus in on how we create influence with our people while maintaining boundaries, which can be a really challenging thing, because I find we can associate control and boundaries and accountability and mix these things together as to how they actually operate. Because without saying, oh, here's a punitive punishment for an action that you had done, how are we supposed to maintain accountability? And so it's creating this real challenge in navigating and holding an expectation within inside of an organization on accomplishing business metrics or how we show up. And a part of that is really having honest and open conversations. For us, when looking at something like transparency as an example, being clear on those boundaries is being ever more important. And then finally, from a leadership perspective, there's this real expectation that we have to support the whole person, not just the function, not just do the things to maximize that person's ability to do their work, but think about, are they, do they have a family? Do they have children? Are they caring for an elderly person? Do they have a dog or some form of a pet? Are they best suited remotely? What's their identity? All of these different things are coming in to how you actually lead that individual. And so it's no longer, oh, just leave all of your stuff at the door, and when you leave, take it with you. It's coming right into the workplace, which kind of links that final evolution around the change in expectations that employees are having in relation to being a part of the conversation, not just being spoken at, but being a part of the strategic initiatives within the organization, taking on and bringing perspective. We've spoken a lot around equity and discrimination and racism and humanity in a lot of our sessions. And so there's this expectation that we bring these conversations to the day-to-day and ask our organizations, well, what's your perspective on social justice? What's your perspective on climate change? And this expectation that you don't bring that here is really not accepted. And then finally, just being engaged and empowered and finding ways to ensure that we're seeing and valuing and welcoming all people to the organization so that they have a sense of belonging that can maximize their abilities to function on a daily basis. A lot of these tensions are really creating some scariness for individuals, some fear for leaders, and a lot of unsureness for organizations as to how to navigate. And for us, when looking at this season, we wanted to pause and say, okay, well, what are the things that we could focus in on to help move the needle, or help maybe make these things feel less scary, and help create a common sense of, hey, we're in this with you, trying to navigate these things. And guess what? We don't have it all figured out either. We're on this learning journey on a day-to-day basis. And we wanted to create a forum where we're sharing openly, vulnerably, to kind of create that compassion with one another. Before I jump, Daena, is there anything you want to add in? Because I know I'll kind of be going through a lot of the lecture, but if just wanted to pause and see.
Yeah, what's standing up for me is that boundary piece, because I think when we're not used to having boundaries, when we first start setting them, there's just this no or strong yes. But a lot of this is navigating gray space. And in order to navigate gray space safely, you have to know what's not okay, what is okay, to create that container. And so knowing your non-negotiables, but as you alluded to last week, this is what's not okay, but everything else is up for negotiation. And so having those clear boundaries so that you can find what can be done is really important. It's not just this is the boundary and nothing else. The boundaries create the space and for which yeses or exploration can occur.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think it also helps create like a better aligned expectation, so that when you're opting in to spend your energy and time in a given place, so within an organization, you can have as closely aligned expectations to the experiences you're likely going to have. So that, to your point, like if you're an organization that says, you know what, mental health isn't a priority for us, and then let's just say that, as opposed to saying, hey, we want to do everything for mental health, but then all the behaviors are totally different. That to me creates a lot of confusion, unsureness, and real challenge in terms of how do we now move forward, because we don't know what those boundaries are.
It also creates distrust.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you're doing more work to counter the trust issues rather than the original priorities you were looking to accomplish.
Yeah, that's a good point, Daena. That's a really good point. So in terms of what we covered this year, which was a lot of big conversations, and in reflection for us, we felt we probably could spend much deeper, or even one season on one of these given topics, but we wanted to try to dip our toes in on some of them. The first one that we talked a lot about was creating space for discomfort. And one of the key items that came out of that is, as we explore new aspects of this workplace experience, it's likely going to be uncomfortable. Daena spoke in her session around bringing old programming and questioning that. And, we did the same within the purpose. And all of these things are going to uproot elements that are likely going to not feel super safe or even comfortable for yourself as you kind of explore these elements. We then spent session 2 with Daena and Nicole thinking about and having a conversation around how are we incorporating DEI into this renewed culture. And one of the elements that really came forward in that conversation is that many equity-seeking groups, so that might also be termed as like marginalized populations, or people who are not falling into what the mainstream would be, are putting on armor before they're even coming back to the workplace. Because for them to fit in, they had to leave a portion of themselves at the door, and they couldn't come with their full self. And ultimately, then when moving forward, creating a sense of belonging, two of the elements that are really centering around that is done through flexibility and empowering choice where you can. And so to me, that also comes with Daena's point around clear boundaries, where if we have these clear boundaries, then we can say everything within, we're open, and there's flexibility and there's choice to then navigate. So it's not so much that we want to be able to choose everything in the world, but let's really set those boundaries and choose how we can, and give that opportunity for people to have the flexibility within them as they're navigating through. And then finally, we spent some time acknowledging the fact there's going to be a lot of discomfort, with Lillian saying, well, how do we learn from this and maybe not run away from it? And part of it, the things that she talked about, was acknowledging that we might hold a bias to run away or avoid, or get rid of the discomfort in the first place. Because it's not necessarily enjoyable when you're sitting and exploring challenging items for maybe yourself or listening to feedback. It's not really great. So we might actually start doing behaviors to just get that out of our system, whether that's being defensive, avoidance, or anger. So acknowledging that we might have that tendency and to catch ourselves and pause in it. And then in moving through, to give, again, that as much flexibility as possible for the individuals in terms of how they can navigate and support their own needs. And so you notice that there's still that theme around flexibility, because that learning and the experiences people are going to have within discomfort is going to be totally different, again, depending on our capacities, depending on our biases and experiences and genetics. All of these factors are going to come into play, which highlights to your point earlier, Daena, around, a lot of this is really gray space, because something that, might feel extremely uncomfortable for me might be like you're walking in the most sunny day possible for you, and vice versa. And I think kind of giving that space and having the grace to honor that with where a person is it can be really challenging. Anything you want to add in on before we jump to the block 2 that we really leaned in on, Daena?
No.
So we then started to shift into the idea of how can we bring more compassion and humanity from a leadership perspective. And we spent some time with Nora, who really helped us understand what leading with humanity is. And a lot of it centered around the giving space for diversity of voice, allowing that process to happen where you're capturing and seeking as much information from different people as possible, and acknowledge that each individual is going to have those different values and needs, and acknowledge what they bring to the table. Now, that doesn't mean, again, that we need to have 900 different strategies for all the people that we're trying to navigate through. However, we do want to try to sort out, I see you, I understand where you are, and I value where that is, and we're going to move into this direction today. In terms of the next one, where we focused on with Dave, who is one of our fire chiefs, talked a lot about compassion and putting care at the center of that, and how we show up with giving care, and then even knowing your people in terms of how do you create accountability, because knowing that we might make mistakes and we might have to lean into performance expectations for people. And this was a really great conversation for me when I kind of went back and listened to it again, in seeing an or sector that's traditionally high performing, high ego, a lot of command control, and seeing how there's a different way in which we can approach creating excellence without kind of breaking down the people that are trying to accomplish that excellence. And then finally, I had spent some time talking about how do we move from control to influence in our leadership approaches, and part of it was about recognizing when you feel this loss of control, how does it show up? Because it may show up in ways that are incongruent to how you want to be on a daily basis. Some of the behaviors that might come up when you feel out of control might be different. And then finally, in terms of creating that influence with people around you, really taking time to foster trust and alignment and engage in regular feedback with staff can only keep depositing within those relationships. Daena then spent some time with us tapping into what really charges us. Like, how do you notice what's good for you, what your body might need? And a lot of this had to do with becoming aware with ourselves and connecting to the feelings that we might hold. So notice when you're doing something, what does it feel like? Where does it show up in your body? And then finally, no matter what choice that you're making, becoming aware of how is that choice serving you or the people around you, and creating as much time as possible to be intentional with those choices, knowing that it's probably not going to be perfect all the time. But the more that we can be aware of the choice that we're making and the intention behind it can be really, really helpful. We then spent time with Michael Prowse, the CEO from Barry, and a lot of it was around purpose or around values and finding our why. And for me, I found it really interesting around regularly messaging and checking in on our values. So talking about it on a day-to-day basis and ensuring that the way that you're hoping you're living is actually happening. So by surrounding yourself with people that are prepared to give honest feedback, those at times can be the greatest gifts, as much as it can be really, really challenging to experience. But when you get that honest feedback, it can ensure that you're holding that accountability to be the person that you're striving to be. And then finally, Nicole came back and her and I did a session on shared purpose. And one of the key things that really came out for me within that is that really purpose is following, and Nicole said this, is following my joy and trying to find something that I can accomplish that's meaningful for myself as well as those around me. And that when trying to find this connection with others, it's so important to take time and listen, stay in tune to what's going on back and forth with each other, and set aside our egos so that we can show up as our true self in building that purpose at whatever level of vulnerability makes sense for you. In terms of why we covered all of these things, it was really oh, sorry, Daena, did you have something you wanted to say or jump in on?
On this slide, I do, but
oh, okay. Perfect. Awesome. I can see getting ready to rock. It's awesome. It was really about acknowledging the complexities of being human. And for me, it's so interesting how we try to curate an image of what it is supposed to be like and ignore or avoid all of the things that actually happen. And so part of it is like life comes with this duality in that there's going to be moments where you have immense joy, celebration, and gratitude. And there's also going to be pain and uncertainty and fear. And sometimes they can even happen at the same time, which you're like, how is that even possible? But again, it's part of our superpowers really of being a human being, is that we can have such a continuum of experience. And the more that we can actually recognize that many of us are trying to do the best we can to navigate, cope, and even thrive within this experience, it can really help give some compassion for ourselves and those around us, and hopefully open up some doors to moving towards something different for ourselves in the future. I'll pause there, Daena, and see what you want to jump in on.
Yeah, that I think it's really interesting timing wise, because this season can come with a lot of joyful moments, but can also come with a lot of pain and dark moments too. And if anyone hasn't seen Jason Silva's work, he blends philosophy and science in a very poetic way. And this quote really stuck out to me on this. And Jason Silva's quoting Alan Watts in this: but there's a price to be paid for every increase in consciousness. We cannot be more sensitive to pleasure without being also more sensitive to pain. And so when we're in those dark moments, or we catch ourselves, or we find ourselves acting out of alignment to who we want to be, or we are searching for that edge between discomfort and pain, and to sit and hold that space, knowing that the hole you might feel you're digging or might feel stuck in is also creating a new height to be explored through joy, can sometimes give you more permission, or to sit in those painful or crunchy moments with more ease, and actually even have gratitude for those moments, because one cannot be true without the other. That is the truth of duality. And so if there's more of an invitation to sit in that space with reverence, then you can expect and will expect that level of joy will meet you on the other side.
Thanks, Daena. And then finally, in terms of moving forward, what we wanted to spend a few moments before we open up, see if there are any questions, and I know we're coming up to time, is really talk about how can we recognize what is within our influence and responsibility. And so for us, when looking at all of the things we talked about, the key items that jumped out is, one, get to know yourself and what your body and what your emotions and what even your intellect needs to find that thriving for whatever that is for you. Take time to get to know others and explore, how do I connect and engage in further steps of vulnerability with those around you, because it can be so rewarding in both these elements. Really taking time to expand your own awareness of your experience, and again, the dualities that might exist within it. for us, like when looking at this, the sooner that we can accept that it's going to be hard work. And that means that there might be some things we don't have capacity for today. And so what we're talking about is not really soft skills. It's not the fluffy stuff. It's really about how to be a human being and what are the skills needed to be a human. And there are going to be those periods of discomfort, as we spoke about, but there'll also be the periods of happiness, joy, and fulfillment. And if we can find ways to carve out time and space for ourselves and what we need, it can be really helping to hone in our responsibility and really taking time to have compassion for ourselves and others. And then finally, taking accountability for ourselves and hold others accountable, the key with grace. Because as Daena said, there can be really crunchy conversations that are layered with a ton of emotion and a ton of feelings around it. But the more that we can spend time sitting and allowing the other to show up as they need, creating space for us to show up as we need, and creating that sort of respectful container, we feel that it can provide an opportunity to try to navigate through a lot of the challenges we spoke about at the beginning. So again, I really, really appreciate everyone sticking around and listening to the session. And hopefully you got a few key points that might re-jog some memories as we go forward. But maybe we'll pause and open up, see if there are any questions, because I'm noticing some comments in the chat.
Jesse, I want to jump into on this, this quest of why we're doing this, and the hard work, and why bother with some of the hard work some days. And there's this, I've struggled with this be better statement sometimes. It doesn't land with me right sometimes. And I've realized that comes from a place where if you're trying to be better from a place of lack or a place of I'm not enough, then that's not a very sound place to want to be better from. We want to be better from a place of overflow and abundance, that I'm so filled. I have so much that's overflowing that I want to give to others. And so on the days that it is feeling like lack and not enough, if you get out of bed that day, that's enough for that day, and that's okay. And then the days you're feeling full and overflowing, then you want to spread that and give that to others. But you don't want to necessarily, give from a place where you're feeling in lack or not enough. You want to focus on that first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree, Daena. Thanks for sharing that. So I will pause, see if there's any questions for either of us. Otherwise, we'll cut it off there. And again, thank everyone so much for taking the time to create space for us to share something that we're really passionate about, and show up and sit and listen to the conversation. We really, really valued everyone who did show up and is listening in. And again, thanks so much for the time.